Welcome to Cisco Firepower Threat Defense. In this section, we're going to cover firepower and FTD objects, logical objects. Let's go ahead and take a look at objects where we're kind of in the meat of the firepower system now. Firepower uses reusable configuration components, objects in this example, to provide an easier way to use values across policies, searches, reports, and dashboards. You may think that these components would be boring, right, looking at something like this, but understanding them will really help you configure firepower and firepower threat defense. So let's go down the list of objects here. Some descriptions for some object types will be brief, but some of them will be more detailed. And then some of them, although they might be brief here, we'll use them more later as we get into more advanced policies and so on. But what we're going to concentrate on here, guys, is we're going to talk about them all up here, at least down to file list, and explain some of these others and how what we're using some of these for. But the point is that these are going to be created and go into an access control policy. So here I've opened the ACP. Now there's nothing in this access control policy. It's not configured in any way. We just had to create it when we brought in our devices, right? Or devices. So if that's the case, here's our policy. And here's where I would add the rules. Now, check this out. If I say, okay, hey, let's add our first rule in here. So if we look at this, look at what we see here on these tabs. And this is important because I'm explaining why do we use objects. Well, a lot of times we have to. For example, if I go back up to devices and do NAT, right, we're going to have to use object. But here's my zones, which are my interfaces, networks, VLAN tags. Let's go through some of this stuff. So let me start up here, and it's a combination of configuring inside the access control policy as well as at this object screen. We'll use both of those to manage objects. So the first one we're going to do is objects is the networks. These are just simply IP addresses with the name, but they can be single IP addresses, CIDR blocks, even ranges. Now, we have our defaults here. Right? These are the defaults, and you can see that we can't get rid of them. I wish we kind of could, right? As maybe you're not going to use all these. For example, here's our link local for IP version 6. Fine, keep that in there. But they also have the one for IP version 4. Maybe you'd never put that in a rule. Or this RFC that no one really knows about, 198.18 for benchmarks, right? Maybe delete those. We'll never use them in a rule just to keep it clean. But nonetheless, we cannot. So I digress. So the first thing I want to do is it kind of depends on your network. So for the most part, in a small, medium, and into large networks, I would come in here and create objects, and I can put them take a bunch of objects and add them into a group, and we'll do that, and then put them in an ACP. So in this example here, I just got a basic object. I'll just say sales VLAN. Now this probably isn't a bad idea. All right, that looks good. Notice I can do that. To create an object for all your VLANs. It kind of depends. You could have up to typically around 4,000 VLANs if you use extended VLANs. And that's a lot of VLANs, so it'd be a lot of objects. So I've been in some really large companies that have 30,000 and 60,000 users respectively. Just objects via VLAN we had to go a different direction. But for the most part, for the rest of us, we're going to go ahead and create objects based on our VLANs. So I would do something like IT VLAN, right? Something like that. Make that a capital V at least. Okay, so we'd come in here and create finance and what IT and marketing. That's another good one is marketing, and the reason why inside of a rule a lot of times you're like, hey, block everyone to social media, right? So we'd use anyone to social media block, and then we could say, but marketing above that can go to social media, something like that, right? Now, hold on a second. So if I come in here, let me get out of here and back in because we need it to be fresh, and I'm going to networks because this is where I'm building objects, isn't it? So I should be able to see them. There they are right here. IT and sales, and I say, oh, I forgot marketing. Let me go out to objects and do it. No, I don't have to. I can come up here and click add object here. I'm going to say marketing VLAN, or whatever. No comma and an IP address. Okay. So now I'd have them. So what do I do with those? Those are good questions. Remember, I'm going to create a rule. I'm going to say test. I'm going to delete this. But I'll say if it's marketing, right? It's coming from marketing, right? And they're going to social media, right? And we'll learn this in, obviously, when we do this. I'm just going to put this in here so you can see this. So it's like, yeah, this isn't going to work like this. You might want to add more rules, right? All I have is an allow rule. Marketing is allowed to social networking. When it matches this rule, it's going to go to egress. We're not going to go to the next rule. It's an access control list, isn't it? It's pretty unhappy ACP right now going, you might want to add some more rules. We'll spend plenty of time on the ACP. So let's go back here to object. You can see that I can add them. And if I was to go from that page and back here again, we should probably be able to see my marketing. There it is right there. Now, one of the things that you want to do, and it can take some time to do what I'm about to say. I go out to a company, and a lot of times we'll do the VLANs, and that's fine. Hundreds of VLANs in here. That's great. And then we'll create an enterprise object. So watch, I'm going to say add group object. I'm going to call this, I don't know, Lamley Enterprise. All right, that's going to, or Lamley Corp or Acme Corp, whatever. And this one takes some time to think about. Now, it's not going to take much time here in this very small company. I'm just going to take all of my VLANs. And I'm also going to add, you can't put a group in a group, and that's what that is. I'm going to add that because that's really what my network is. So that way this object will work. Now I'll have this group with, all my VLANs in it and whatnot. And there's my Lamley Enterprise. This becomes important because as we make rules, we're saying, now does the enterprise encompass, your 2,000 branches or your 20 branches or 200 branches, whatever it is? Does it include all of those IPs as well and all those VLANs out there? Or do we create one and it's just at corp and then they have their own? Those are the kind of things you need to understand when you're designing your enterprise with Firepower. How am I going to design my enterprise objects? Okay, it's very good stuff. So we can add our VLANs. These are just the IPs. It's pretty simple, isn't it? I would just keep going until I have everything. Now, when I'm at a customer, I'm out there doing an install or migration, I'll create as many objects as I can because it makes it easier for them to administrate later on. So I'll sit there and can spend days creating objects. Now, ports are layer 4 ports, right? Layer 3, 4 stuff, layer 4, right? TCP, UDP stuff. We can also do ICMP, and we'll add those in here. For example, come in here and say, I want to add a port. How about this one? Remote Desktop Protocol, RDP, right? And I'm going to say that's TCP 3389. So now I have this, and we can't have spaces, can we? I knew that. This started in the 6 code, didn't it? All right. So now I have a new object right here, RDP. Now, one of the things, if I add another object, so where would I use this? Well, again, if I take my rule, what I'm really doing is come over here to ports in the rule. And now I could say RDP should be in here. There it is, right? Okay. But I could have done this. Allow, these, when we're creating the objects, they're not allowed or denied. That's chosen right here, isn't it? And we'll get to these different actions. But why couldn't I have done this? Sure, I could have. Is there any difference between that and this? Absolutely not. Those are exactly the same. The object just gives me, an understanding administratively, right? Because maybe someone doesn't know what 3389 is, possibly, right? So it makes it a little bit easier for administration, right? But this is how we can do it. We can add it here. I can create another object here and add a group to put them in. So that is my ports. I usually don't make ports out here too much. I usually come out here and kind of just put in what I want. And say UDP 53, right? And again, though, we'll look at some defaults here. And isn't that what this is, right? UDP over 53, port 53 over UDP, right? That's a DNS query. All right, so both of those are the same. Again, it doesn't matter. Most people would know what 53 is, but again, administratively, it's already there. Now, on the interface, Now, I'm not going to create anything right now. We'll do that when we get to our interfaces, obviously. But what this allows me to do is to create zones. Remember, we talked about zones. So a security zone is just the descriptive name for an interface, isn't it? So if you have a firepower appliance, there's slight differences here. If you have FTD, look at what we can create here. And again, when we get to interfaces, I'll go through these different types. If you had an ASA with firepower, right, you'd use inline if you had like an appliance, and again, and then switched and routed, which we can make our devices as well. So all of these can be configured on appliance or FTD. ASA with firepower is this one. Passive, we're just gathering information, isn't it? So I'm not going to go ahead and create zones right now. I want to go ahead and do my interfaces first. So when we get to interface, we'll come back to this because we want to put interfaces in zones. When we come here now, we can make rules that say if it's going from this zone to that zone, right? Remember that we'll talk about how zones are based on like a fence between properties and how we're giving permissions for someone to cross that fence. All right, and then the next one we're going to talk about is the tunnel zone. Now this is going to be used, this is one of those that we go by relatively quickly. This is used in the what's called a pre-filter. Before, if I was to look at the FTD drawing of the packet flow, the pre-filters in the ingress LINA process. So under here, policies, pre-filter. And inside there, we're going to look at data inside of a tunnel and so on. So we would add tunnel tags and so on in here. So when we get to, these are simply just an arbitrary name you create to assign to tunnel traffic, but we'll talk about that when we get to the pre-filter. Now under the application filters, this is like application awareness. I usually don't do these here, but you obviously could. There's some really cool stuff with this. Now, the reason that I would use this above, because people go, well, why don't I have the application? This is that same page, right? This is what we're looking at right now in objects. Why don't I just use the URLs? Sure, it would be easier if I just chose all the Cisco categories. I don't have to do all that work. Yes, that is true. But, you know, about half my customers don't buy the URL filter. It's very expensive. So a lot of them don't do it. So, and because maybe they're doing it in another firewall and so on, I see that. So they have other products that might do URL filtering. So under applications here, let me just do it back here. The reason why I can't create a new user created filter from here. So I'm going to create it here, then we'll see it there. So I'm going to call this, how about this? Non-work sites, or right? In this case here, I'm not necessarily even saying blocking them, even though that's what we're going to end up doing. I get this a lot. I get people coming to me and say, hey, I want you to block all non-work sites, right? Or, you know, at first when I go into a site, they're like, hey, allow everyone through. I only hire the best people. All they do is work. We don't worry about anything. Well, we'll go a week and run a report and find out they don't work at all. So they come back and the pendulum swings, right? And we say, okay, we're going to block all non-work sites. So I'm going to give you a couple ways to do this if you get this business requirement, which you very well may, because I hear it all the time. So here's one of the things that I do. I can pick the applications by hand, but I want to go and say, hey, if the risk on this application is high or very high, notice I have 400 different available applications now. And the business relevance, though, we're going to get this a little bit better. Now we're only to 300, is low and very low. Now we don't know exactly what these are. We'll find out. Right? This is a way to do it, right? So I kind of like that. I like this one. I use this one. Non-work sites, you know, high risk. Let's see if I can type in that much. And then I have to say add to rule here. This is not a bad thing. This is a way to do it. I'll show you multiple ways to do this because I get these requests all the time. So if I was to, I'll come over here and click this, and I should see it there now, right? That's the reason I would do this. But now that I'm in here, so I could click this and click on that and add to rule. Now I'm saying, well, we're going to, you know, block with reset. We'll discuss those when we get to the ACP. But now I'm in a rule with this. Not a bad idea. Now let me tell you about another one that I get on these applications sometimes. It's kind of odd, but I'll come here and I'll say, block or resume sites, right? Something like that. I'll get people that go, hey, I want to know whoever is updating their resume. And gosh, it's kind of hard, right, in that sense. But we could do something like job searches, one of the ones that I do. Let me do LinkedIn here. There we got one right there. We got a job search. So we could go to Monster and things like that and create a rule on things like this. This is, I don't like doing this at a company, right? And the people are looking for a job because of someone saying things like that. But my point is you have this flexibility, right, to do something like this. And this is included with your base license, right? That's why this is kind of cool. VLAN tags, if I was an appliance with a switch, then I could just tag some VLANs. Not much we really need to do here. Now the secure group tag, though, I'm not going to do this here. I would use this if I didn't have ICE with PX Grid. So later on in the advanced class, right, second class here, we're going to go to system integration and we're going to add a connection to our ICE server, right, and do PX Grid. So the PX Grid, it's kind of the future of security though, right? So this allows us to specify a tag based on the knowledge of what secure group tags will be passing through your devices. So basically it adds a field in your packets to identify you. It's the future of security. There's no doubt. So we're going to come back to secure group tag in the advanced class. Now, under URLs, I definitely use this. I don't really create them from here so much. So I'm going to say add URL. You mean you can, but it's a lot like that application except in URLs, right? So I could name this one Facebook. I get this one a lot. We want to block Facebook. Don't blame people for saying that. So I do something like this, *facebook.com, right? Something like that. And now it's pretty much all, and it's going to prepend, right? So whatever you type in, if I was to leave this, and one of the examples that Alex, my co-author, if I was to type something like IGN, he likes this example. He likes using this example because this would match IGN.com, but also verisign.com, right? So we have to remember that when you do these. I like to use the URL filters. I like to use the Cisco built-in ones. Now, notice I hadn't mentioned this yet. Let me save this and go back up to network, the overrides. So now this is just a value here. I'm going to come back to that allow overrides here in a second. But if I'm up here and I come back to networks for a minute, and I can see my my objects here. Now, this object, let's say I created a DMZ object, which I absolutely should have, and I didn't put that in there. So DMZ, right? 10.10.10.32/28. So now I have that DMZ. Let me go back up here to objects to network for a minute and open up my group. Where are you? And add my DMZ in there. Now, hold on a second. Why I'm mentioning this is because maybe maybe I create one called server farm or DMZ, and maybe locations have different values for that. Now we can create different object names, DMZ 1, 2, and 3, for example. But when we get to system domains in the advanced class, what we want to do is use the same object to have different values. And the way that I would do that, if I open this up, I'd come over here and say allow overrides. And then I click down here, it would find my objects. So whatever my other device is in that remote location, I could click on it and say, well, I'm going to add that into this object and its name is going to be Bob, or whatever. So that way we have the same name here, but we can override it in a leaf object, right? So I don't use those a whole lot because people can get confused with those, but they could be useful for you if you're using domains and you have something like DMZ or server farm and you want to use that object in multiple locations with different values.